Before we hop into the video, I wanted to let you know if you're looking to become a better player, I do have a Metafy group and offer coaching. When you join my group, you gain access to all my competitive deck lists, exclusive TCG improvement videos, the opportunity to ask me questions, and also a discount code on individual coaching sessions. Make sure to check it out. The link will be at the very top of the description. All right, let's hop into the video. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over my top 10 decks currently in the standard format. All right, let's hop right into it. Hopping into it here at number 10, we have Terapagos. Terapagos is a deck that has been performing relatively okay. I will admit that its performances have definitely fallen off over the past couple tournaments, but fundamentally, I still think it is a pretty strong deck. This deck has gotten multiple top cuts at regionals, most notably Tordreklev getting second place at the Gdańsk Regional Championship, but it hasn't necessarily gotten that big win yet. I think it has, a super good engine, having access to the Pidgeot with that quick search, being able to, kind of control the board, find, the pieces that you need to be able to pull off those big Dusknoir combos. You also have access to the Noctowl as well with that Jewel Seeker, such a powerful card, pretty much able to expand your board up to 8 on the second turn, take those big knockouts as well. You can kind of just do so much with this deck, but hasn't been performing as well. I do think that, due to the rise of Charizard, which is definitely a tricky matchup for the Terapagos deck, and also Regidrago as well, gaining the Alolan Executor, this deck does have a lot more competition right now, but it does do really well against a lot of those, turbo decks. For example, if you play up against, a Raging Bolt, a Turbo Roaring Moon, those matchups are, definitely very solid. You have access to Dusknoir as well, which just makes you very versatile versus a, large, group of decks, which is really nice because the metagame is, pretty wide open right now. This is not necessarily a super, centralized, I feel like, format where there's only like 2 or 3 decks that you really, kind of need to prepare for. You want to have a deck that's kind of just in general good, overall, and I think that this is, a deck that, kind of, has that right now. I will say that it's not exceptional versus everything, but I feel like it has a chance, and I think that's, really important, is that you might not be like overwhelmingly favorable versus a lot of the top tier decks, but you're not really overwhelmingly poor, into them. And I think that, holds a lot of value, that you kind of feel like you have a fighting chance. And I think, when you play this deck, to a tournament, I definitely think that, giving yourself at least a shot is good, because there are some decks that take very polarizing matchup spreads where like you do, really good against, a group of decks, but you just do like absolutely horrible versus, maybe 30 or 40% of the format. And that can, kind of lead to some risk. So overall, I think, Terapagos is still, very good. I think that it's, still like definitely one of the strongest decks. It's just fundamentally very good, but its matchup spread has definitely weakened a little bit as, decks like Zard have begun to take up a little bit more of the meta share. Overall, it's still a good deck, though not necessarily as good as it was maybe a couple weeks ago. I still think it has a chance. But anyways, let's hop into number 9. Alrighty, hopping into number 9 here, we got Raging Bolt. Raging Bolt's still a pretty solid deck in the standard format, one of the better turbo decks, very fast and consistent for the most part, being able to achieve your board state the majority of games with a simple Sadas onto your Raging Bolts and a bunch of Teal Masks to be able to get you to those big one-hit KOs with Bellowing Thunder. Also have, things like Slitherwing as well, good versus, the Mimikyu decks, also pretty good against anything that is weak to fighting. You're able to take those one-hit KOs on things like Terapagos with that Burning Turbulence attack, which is really nice overall. So yeah, I think the deck is relatively decent. I don't think it's overwhelming in any way, which you lose in matchup spread, percentage points, you gain in consistency. So you're able to turn, some pretty bad matchups in some spots into okay matchups just because your deck sets up at a higher rate than a lot of, decks currently right now. So that's, definitely something that's nice. You can say you're going to get to play Pokemon almost every single game, with a super consistent list playing, the heavy trekking shoes. I personally like the trekking shoes over the Luminian package. So yeah, that's currently where I'm at with the list. I think Bolt's, really decent. I don't think it's like necessarily overwhelming in any way, but it makes for, a solid deck, and I definitely expect it to perform relatively decently moving forward. All right, hopping into number 8 here, we have Lugia. Lugia is still a relatively decent deck. However, it has fallen under hard times as the metagame has kind of changed over the past couple of weeks. We see Dragapult Iron Thorns and just regular Quad Thorns seeing more success. So it might be time to potentially add in a Fluttermane or a Klefki to help out in those matchups. I will say that those cards don't necessarily instantly win the matchup, but they do make them a little bit more manageable. Lugia is a deck that when it gets going, it's really, really powerful. You know, you're able to take one shots with things like Shinchino. You're able to take, multiple, prize cards with things, like Iron Hands. You have access, to gift energy. You're able to kind of control the board state. It's just getting there can be quite hard. So yeah, I think the deck is good. I think that it's, fundamentally a strong deck. However, I think the metagame has become a little bit more hostile to it. I think matchups like Rhydon as well can definitely pose some problems, just because they can like run you over super quickly. They can attack with things like Iron Hands as well. If they take 3 prizes on the first turn with Iron Hands, it makes Legacy Energy not really have that much of an effect in the game. So yeah, I think that Lugia is still a decent deck, just like when it comes to like the power level of it, but I think the metagame is a lot more hostile to it, and you still sometimes deal with that problem. Actually, not even sometimes, you still quite frequently deal with the issue of the deck just not functioning. So that's always something that you kind of have to worry about. But yeah, all right, let's hop into number 7. Alrighty, hopping into number 7 here, we have Gholdengo. This is going to be the list that got top 4 at the Sacramento Regional Championships, piloted by Victor. And I think the deck is really cool. You have access to things like the Togekiss, which give yourself a chance versus some of those more difficult matchups like the Zard matchup. And yeah, I think this deck is, pretty cool overall. Gaining Energy Search Pro was really, really nice. Cypher Maniacs is an incredibly powerful card in this deck, paired up with things like Coin Bonus and Pheasantipity. Once you're able to get set up, you're pretty much able, to control the board state, find exactly what you need every single turn, which is really, really nice. Overall, I think this deck is solid. I think the Togekiss adds a lot to it, giving you that chance to, get a little bit lucky versus some of those tough matchups like Charizard. Giving yourself a chance to beat them a little bit more frequently, I think is definitely worth it. Overall here, I think that, Victor's list is very, very strong. It sets up, pretty nicely, and I've been having fun with it. So yeah, I think Gholdengo's good. Definitely a solid deck. I think that the biggest thing that holds it back, admittedly, is its linearity. Your main attacker is just a 2-prizer, which means that you really need to get the Togekiss out versus certain decks that can one-shot the Gholdengo with a 1-prizer, meaning that you're banking on flipping heads off that nobility, which is kind of an issue, because if you're because like if you're playing against Charizard and they either knock out the Togepi or you flip a Tails, you can just lose on the spot, and that's an issue. So you do have to gamble just a little bit with this deck, but when it gets going and you get a little bit lucky, you have a lot of potential to go far. All right, let's hop into number 6. Alrighty, hopping into number 6 here, we have Iron Thorns Dragapult EX. This is a deck that has popped up recently. This is going to be the list that Mads Jensen used to get top 8 at the most recent Stuttgart Regional Championship. And I think the deck is pretty good. You have access to Iron Thorns. Pretty much your goal is to sit behind an Iron Thorns at the very beginning of the game, hit with it a couple of times, move energies onto your Dragapult, and then you can attack with Phantom Dive. Very simple strategy. You have access to things like the Crispin, which means that you'll be able to power up attackers very, very quickly, which is, really, really nice, because if you play against a deck that can deal with the Iron Thorns, very quickly, you need to be able to power up that Dragapult very fast. So having access to that is definitely very, very nice. You also have the Technical Machine Evolution as well, which is really cool in this deck, because you can use something like the Arven to get the TM, and then you can, get up those Dragalotes really, really quickly, as you don't play things like Rare Candy. So the TM Evo is definitely very, very important, and your board state oftentimes is not going to be pressured very quickly because you have Iron Thorns with its ability slowing them down. I think this deck is really cool. I think it's an easier deck to play, so if you're looking for a deck that is definitely very strong and relatively easy to learn, I definitely think this is a deck to heavily consider. I think this deck is going to take up a decent percentage of the metagame heading into Toronto. I'm going to make an assumption around 6 to 8%. I think that, this deck is, definitely going to show up and, prove itself to be one of the better decks in the format. Thorns Pull is good. It's my preferred variant of Iron Thorns and also Dragapult, as I think Dragapult is a little bit inconsistent and just doesn't necessarily have a whole lot going for it right now. Whereas this, build that kind of focuses on slowing them down first and then, getting tons of Dragalotes on the board. I think this version's a little bit better, and it's been my preferred choice. All right, let's hop into number 5. Alrighty, hopping into a fan favorite, we have Cloth. Who would have thought a couple months ago that Cloth would be considered a top tier deck? Well, with access to Precious Charlie, this deck gets so much better. You're so much more consistent. You're able to get everything on the board. You have access now to Area 0 as well, meaning that you can get 8 bench Pokemon on the board, and I think this deck is great. You can use that Brute Bonnets to poison the active and then attack with Cloth. You have access to Binding Mochi as well, which actually allows powerful attackers like Terapagos to take one-hit KOs on pretty high HP Pokemon, which is really, really nice. You also got the Oranguru V with that ability that allows you to get multiple tool cards, which is great because you can use the ability, get those tool cards that you need, and then use something like a switch card to be able to go into your attacker. You have access to Latias EX as well, which just gives you so much mobility, which feels, super, super nice to have. You have access to Pheasantipity as well, which means you're going to be able to, get yourself out of situations where they put you to a low count and then take a knockout. Having Fez is great. The deck is really, really fun. You have decent matchups against a lot of decks in the format. I will say that your Charizard matchup is relatively scary if you aren't able to donk them with something like the Petra and Poison, and they do get fully set up. That matchup can be relatively difficult at times. So that's, one matchup if you're considering to play Cloth, probably should test it out. One of the problems with this deck, I will say, is sometimes it just doesn't work. It has a lot of cards that you want to have on the second or third or fourth turn of the game. The problem is sometimes you draw into all of them on the first turn of the game and your deck just doesn't function. Your deck really needs to Squawkabilly on the first turn, and if you aren't able to Squawkabilly, sometimes your deck kind of clunks up and doesn't actually thin itself out properly, and it feels really, really weak. So it is kind of a glass cannon deck, kind of like something like Lugia V-Star, but when it gets going, it's really, really powerful. It's just, can it get going? I think if the deck was able to consistently set up every single game, it would probably be in the top 3, but I think that's the one thing that's kind of holding the deck back. Overall, Cloth is really, really good, and I definitely expect to see success moving forward. It's a fun deck, and I've been having a lot of fun playing the deck, and yeah, it has surprised me with how good it is. I think it's pretty nice. All right, let's hop into top 4. Alrighty, hopping into the top 4, as I just said, we have Miraidon. This is going to be the list that Landon Caitler used to win the Sacramento Regional Championships, and I personally think it's the perfect list. I have played this deck a decent amount, and I can't find a card that I really want to cut for something else. Everything feels like it has a purpose, and it works. The deck's great. You have decent matchups against a lot of things in the format. Most importantly, Regidrago being arguably the strongest deck in the format. Being able to beat that is really, really important. Taking a 55-45 to 60-40 against that matchup just feels absolutely huge. Your matchup against Charizard is actually not as bad as people think, because if you are able to go first and then hit turn 2, amp you very much with the Bravery Charm, if they don't play Lost Vacuum, they don't really have a way to deal with it. And you can take 4 prize cards with the Iron Hands, and then you can finish the game off with something like the Raichu. Also have access to Magneton as well, which just really, kind of unlock this deck. It made it so that you weren't as reliant on using, your generators and hitting 2 energy every single time. That was kind of the problem with this deck, is that when you didn't have access to Magneton, you were just so reliant on generators. Now you're not anymore. Also being able to give up 1 prize in most circumstances against specifically non-Briar decks, it's totally fine, because your opponent has to go through 3 2 prizers anyway, so giving them a Magneton puts them onto an odd prize card trade and doesn't actually help them that much. So overall, I think this deck is really, really good. It's very fast, very consistent. In my opinion, is the best turbo deck in the format because of its versatility. One of turbo deck's biggest issues, pretty much throughout the past couple of formats, is the 1 prize decks that can attack with a 1 prizer. For example, Raging Bolt really struggled against something like the Lost Zone Toolbox, because they're able to take knockouts with like 1 prizers, and you can't really respond to that well. However, with this deck, you have access to the Iron Hands and amp you very much, which makes it significantly better. So overall, I think it's the most versatile turbo deck in the format, and I definitely have a lot of respect for it. I think it's good. I will say it hasn't performed necessarily great after Sacramento. We had Stuttgart and also Perth, where the deck didn't see a ton of success, but I think heading into the Toronto Regional Championships, it has a chance to go far. All right, let's hop into the top 3. Alrighty, hopping into the top 3. At number 3, we have Gardevoir, specifically the Turbo variant. This is going to be the list that Henry Chow and plenty of other players have seen success with. I think this is a fantastic 60, and Gardevoir has been seeing success again. Most recently won the Perth Regional Championships and have been seeing consistent placements throughout top 8s, top 32, and more. So it's been showing up at tournaments, doing well, and it finally got another major victory at Perth, which was cool to see. So yeah, I think that, Gardevoir is still very, very good. I think it has a chance versus everything. Your Regidrago matchup is pretty close. I think you're totally fine against that matchup. Your Zard matchup is pretty close as well. You do really well against pretty much all the turbo decks too. You do pretty good versus things like Iron Thorns. If you really want to make the Iron Thorns matchup good, you could potentially cut Spear Tomb for Flutter Mane, so you have access to Flutter Mane and also something like the Klefki to turn off Thorns' ability, which is really, really good. So if you want to consistently beat that matchup, you can just add in Flutter Mane and you should be pretty okay. I will say the slower variant piloted by Keto at Perth did win. They opted to play the unfair stamp and only one rare candy, and kind of went back to the old Gardevoir variant that we saw kind of at the end of last season see success. So yeah, I think that is kind of interesting to see, but I still am a big fan of the turbo variant. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, I think Gardevoir is still very, very good. I think it deserves a spot in the top 3. I will say though, there are 2 decks that are, in my opinion, slightly better than it. All right, let's hop into number 2. Alrighty, hopping into number 2 here, we have Charizard. Charizard has seen a resurgence recently, most recently winning the Stuttgart Regional Championships piloted by Arnie, and this is the exact 60, I believe, that they used to win the tournament. Charizard is great. It has a chance versus pretty much every major deck in the formats. You have access to, things like the Dusknoir. You have the consistency in the quick search. You have Charizard as well. Great late game deck. A lot of decks in the format can sometimes struggle at the end of the game. Charizard isn't really, a deck that I feel like does that very often. You have access to Briar as well, which is really nice too. You just kind of have all the tools you need to be successful. I will say the thing that is holding this deck back is the shaky Regidrago matchup. Your Regidrago matchup, if you are playing against a Regidrago player who knows how to play against the matchup, I do think it's about 40-60, and that's the only reason why the deck is not the #1 deck in the format, because I feel like it's so good against the majority of the field. It takes kind of 50-50s and 55-45s to, I would say, the majority of pretty much the top 10. And it's also very good against like rogue decks as well, just having access like to Briar, plus things like the Curse Blast on Dusknoir. You're just going to be good against like a lot of those random like one prize decks, and like that might be kind of trying to catch you off guard. But the thing holding it back is the Drago matchup. If they know what they're doing, it can be tough. Your best bet is using Unfair Stamp plus a Radiant Charizard and a Defiance Band. That's kind of your best way to try and like make it back into games. You can also go the 1-2-3 prize route, where like you knock out a Cleffa, then you knock out a Teal Mask, and then you try and Briar for game. The problem with that is that usually means you have to try and set up usually three Zard throughout the game, which is kind of difficult to do. You have to pretty much use all your rare candies because you need a rare candy for Pidgeot. So that like line puts a lot of like stress on the deck. You have to draw really well to do that. So typically Radzard plus like an Unfair Stamp and Defiance Band, most circumstances, feels like your most reliable comeback option. But yeah, Zard's still very, very good, and I definitely think that as Drago loses a little bit of its meta share, I do think that Zard gets even better. All right, let's hop into number 1. Alrighty, hopping into number 1 here, we have Regidrago. Probably comes to no surprise to a lot of you, but Drago, in my opinion, is the strongest deck in the format. One of the cool things about Drago right now is you actually have a lot of flexibility for like what matchups you really want to kind of tech for. If you want to have a decent like Lugia matchup, you can have the Temple of Sinnoh. If you want to tech for something like the Gardevoir matchup, something like the Jamming Tower is quite good. Terra Orb is also kind of a flex spot. Could be maybe a third Iono, third, Boss's Orders, maybe an Iron Bundle. So yeah, the moral of the story here is that you have space. You can figure out what matchups you, really want to focus on, and you can build your Regidrago deck, kind of around that, which is, I think, another reason why the deck is just so good. You just have so many options. You have so many options. You can attack with so many different powerful attackers. You're a relatively consistent deck in the format. You're good versus the majority of decks, except the turbo decks are kind of scary, but they're still all pretty winnable. So yeah, I think Regidrago is still great. Very, very powerful deck. There's not really a whole lot to say on it. It's just the strongest deck in the format, in my opinion. But anyways, that is going to do it for the video. Let me know what you think of my top 10. Let me know if you thought that I missed a deck or put something too high. or potentially too low. But anyways, thanks so much for all the support as always. I appreciate it. If you enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And yeah, best of luck to anyone going to the upcoming Toronto Regionals and any upcoming major tournaments. All right, this is Smart TCG, and I'll speak with you guys again soon. Thanks so much. See ya.